Welcome back to the Capes and Tights podcast right here on capesandtights.com. I'm your host, Justin Soderberg. This episode is once again brought to you by our friends over at Galactic Comics and Collectibles at galacticcomicsandcollectibles.com. Check them out on 547 Hammond Street in Bangor, Maine, if you live in the Bangor, Maine area. This episode is Alex Segura, who is a best-selling and award-winning author of books like Secret Identity and the upcoming Alter Ego, as well as Dark Space with Rob Hart. And he's also got a book on pre-order called Daredevil, Enemy of My Enemy, coming out in July of 2025, as well as his Legendary Lynx graphic novel that ties into Secret Identity and Alter Ego. Is also on deck Tracy, Spider Society, upcoming Green Horde, and Miss Fury, and so much more. This episode is Alex Segura, comic book writer and best-selling author, right here on Capes and Tights. Enjoy, everyone. Welcome to the podcast, Alex. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I mean, I guess I said before we started recording, you're a really busy person, so I'm glad you took the time out to chat with us here on the podcast.
I appreciate it. Yeah, no, I'm a fan. You guys have been big supporters of my stuff. So,
when you're a good writer, it's pretty easy to do, right? I mean, you know. Well, I've always said that when I talk to people on the podcast, I've always said the nice thing about doing your own thing is that I get to talk to people who actually enjoy their stuff. It's not like I'm working for a bigger conglomerate where they're like, you've got to talk to Alex. He's got a comic book coming out, And so like, it's actually nice that if I, luckily over the years, I've actually been able to only decline to been like, yeah, I'm too busy to talk to you because of the quality of the work wasn't that great. But usually
that's the blessing. You get to decide. Yeah, you get to pick who you talk to, and it means a lot. It's appreciated for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And so we're on episode 198, and the way that it works, weirdly, is I mentioned Liana was on earlier today. Liana is actually episode 200, and so we did like a little talk.
They deserve that spotlight.
Yeah, like go back and forth and all that stuff. And I'm always like, sometimes I feel like David Letterman, talking about trying to promote the book for 5 minutes, and sometimes I actually feel like it's just a conversation. But you know what? Every episode's different, and we're here to talk about your stuff.
Thank you.
So before we get into too far, I mean, like, so you're an author, you're a comic writer. You have been writing geek and nerd and pop culture stuff for a little while now. And how did you get into comic books and be writing either about them or with them?
How did I get into comic books? I mean, my earliest memory of comics was getting an Archie digest as a kid. I mean, I knew of comics, like I had seen them, but I wasn't a reader. When I started reading, my first comic was a Betty and Veronica double digest that my mom got me at the grocery store. And that was an introduction to the medium, but also an introduction to like Dan DeCarlo, Harry Lucy, Sam Schwartz, and all those great artists that I didn't like connect with name-wise yet. But DeCarlo was the first artist that I was like, oh, he's, in the same way that Carl Barks was the good Duck artist, DeCarlo to me was like the good Archie artist. And then after that, as I got older, I was really into Archie, but then I got into more superhero stuff. My first superhero comic was a reprint of Spectacular Spider-Man magazine #2, which was the black and white magazine that they did around the time that Lee and Romita were on the main Spider-Man book. And it was a reprint of this terrifying Green Goblin story drawn by Romita that was like super trippy, psychedelic. And I think the connective tissue there is DeCarlo and Romita have this knack for making everyone beautiful. Romita made everyone beautiful and also made Norman Osborn chilling. And so that seemed like an easy kind of connect. And then in terms of like current stuff at the time, I was picking up Amazing Spider-Man, Uncanny X-Men, which was like the tail end of the Claremont run. And I was reading Uncanny X-Men and then also Classic X-Men. So kind of piecing to, we didn't have the Wikipedia or, fandom.com or whatever you use to kind of figure things out. We had the Marvel cards and the DC cards and whatever back issues you could scrounge up. So that was my initial crash course into comics. And that just opened the door to like a lifelong fandom. So I'd go to my comic shop whenever I had a couple dollars to rub together and buy back issues of things. And I was really into, Batman and Spider-Man and Daredevil. I really love the Lee Weeks DG Chichester run, Last Rites, which I'm rereading now. It's top of mind because I'm writing that Daredevil novel. But it's Justice League International, J.M. DeMatteis on Spectacular Spider-Man. So I was a pretty voracious reader, and the Image Revolution was happening at the same time. So I was a big Wildcats, Youngblood reader. In terms of how it became a profession, in college, I was an English major, but I worked on the school paper, so I thought journalism was going to be my track professionally, and it was for a little while. Um, and at the same time, I thought, well, maybe I can blend my passion for comics with this trade, this craft of journalism. So I reached out to Newsarama, to Mike Duran and Matt Brady, neither of whom are there still, but Newsarama continues. And they let this young kid like interview creators. And so right out of the gate, I was interviewing people like Ed Brubaker, Peter David, Jimmy Palmiotti and Justin Gray. I remember those were my first handful of interviews was Ed Brubaker for his Wildstorm series Point Blank, which, you know, kind of just set the tone, and he continues to write stories in that like very dark noir
Mhm.
space. And Jimmy Palmiotti for 21 Down, I think, and Peter David like about the tail end of Young Justice, just before it was like taken over by the new Titans relaunch at the time. Um, and so that's really was my side gig for a long time, for a few years. And then I got a job in-house at Wizard. So I moved to New York to work at Wizard for a couple of years. And that was my first full-time like industry job where I was going to conventions, meeting
Mhm.
creators face to face, taking meetings, editing, writing. And a lot of the friends I made there are still really close friends of mine today. So that was a really like formative period for me. Um, I don't mean to give you my whole CV, but then I
No,
worked, yeah,
you're good.
I worked at DC doing publicity, and that was another really big moment just in terms of also see really like learning how to promote a comic book, learning how to be a publicist, but also watching to see how these creators behave themselves,
Mhm.
in terms of doing the work, how you act professionally and what you can do, like what the successful writers do, what the writers I liked do. Like I got to, work with people like Craig Brucka, Gail Simone, Jeff Johns, Brian Azzarello. I mean, you name it. G. Willow Wilson, I met her there. She was starting out at Vertigo. Brian K. Vaughan.
Mhm.
Um, and it was just a nice like bird's eye view to see how these talented people worked and what they did, and what it was like to be in the industry. Like in the back of my mind, I always knew I wanted to write. And so I did my job as best I could, but I was also kind of researching. And at the same time, because I was working in comics, I couldn't really like pitch my comics around. Like it was a little, it was frowned upon if you worked in-house to like go to the editorial row and be like, can I write this or that? So I started writing novels. That's when I started writing my crime novels, the Pete Fernandez
Mhm.
books, which launched originally in 2013. Um, and then at the same time, I went to Archie, and that's when I first started writing comics. I did a short thing for DC before I left, and then I went to Archie and wrote stuff like Archie Meets Kiss, Occupy Riverdale, Archie Meets Ramones. I wrote the Archies for a while. And so that was happening at Archie, and I was also writing these novels um, simultaneously. And eventually it just got to the point after I left Archie and went to Oni to oversee their sales and marketing, where the writing stuff was doing well enough that I felt like, let's just go out on a limb and just try it and do that. And at that point, I'd already gotten a few small things from Marvel and DC, which was really fun. And it's just continued from there, which has been a blessing.
It's such a fun thing to hear you talk about. Well, two things I realized when you were talking was that
Mhm.
I'm approaching 200 episodes, and the fact that I'm just now thinking that there's not many careers like they have like professional sports, things like that, where like a passion from your childhood becomes it comes, like there's not very many lawyers that are like, yeah, when I was like 6, I was litigating in my bedroom, like
Yeah.
it just happens to be at one point, like my wife's a structural engineer. I mean, when she
Oh,
was younger,
cool.
she wasn't like building things. She came into that as she got older and was like, yeah, I guess that
Mhm.
could be a career and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But it's like
No,
it
it's a
is kind of
blessing.
fun.
It's
It's
really,
a it's fun to see that. And you went from reading Archie to writing Archie, which is, there are comic creators who obviously read things and then they grow up. There's very, not to say few, but it's not always that case that you're going to read something and then write it later on. Read Amazing Spider-Man, then write it later on. Like there's people
yeah,
who
no,
read
it's
Amazing
not.
Spider-Man then now working for Star Wars or for independent
Yeah.
comics. Like,
No, it's definitely not lost on me, the gratitude that comes with doing this stuff. Like, I mean, I grew up a Spider-Man kid. Spidey 2099 was one of my favorites. And so getting to write him in comics and in prose and for different age groups like YA and middle grade
yeah.
and just, comics, it's cool. It's definitely, there's no other way to say it.
And that's why sometimes I've always like not argue with people, but I'm like have a disagreement with people when they're like, oh, that's not that Spider-Man run wasn't that great. Maybe whatever. And it's like dude, this person's an actual Spider-Man fan most of the time, and they're writing a
Mhm.
story that means something to them. Or so it's not like this random person. They're just like, oh, Alex, write this random character you know nothing about and have no passion for. Yes, there
Yeah.
is that, but most of the time, it's like they're not going to tap you to write something unless you actually have some sort of emotional attachment, some sort of attachment to it, so that you can actually do the best job. This is not like you're gonna come into
Yeah.
it knowing
Yeah.
nothing, So
And it's also, I think, creatively for me, I don't take stuff that I don't have that kind of passion or
yeah.
obsession because I've learned the lesson. Like the few times I've taken a gig where I'm like, I guess I can kind of find my way into it. Either it works and great, you've like tapped into a new fandom. But most of the time, like if you don't have that passion already, it's going to show in the work. So
Mhm.
you try to take gigs that are cool to you, that get you excited, because that's the way you'll get motivated to do the work.
Absolutely, and that's like I said, same thing here. I'm motivated to talk to you because I've read your stuff and I enjoy your stuff and so on
Thank
and so
you.
forth, and it's great. And you are, I mean, I've talked to people in the past who have jumped between prose and writing a novel and writing comics and things like that. But
Mhm.
a lot of times it's like they're an author who has written a couple comics or a comic book writer who has written a novel, and so like
Right.
there's like this like their main job is one or the other. I'm like, when you look into your current work and stuff like that, it's like, yes, you have a lot of different comics that are out, but you
Mhm.
have, I mean, when you put in stuff, I better put stuff together on here. I was like, oh, there's like not equal amount, but like if the number of words, it might be equal. I would
Mhm.
consider you an author and a comic book writer. It's like you're splitting it down the middle almost. And is this something where you write a novel and you take a break, not like in timing, but like when you're writing, say you're writing a couple chapters and then write a comic book issue or something like that? Or is there something like you dedicate specific time to? How do you separate the two between the two novels and in their comic book writing?
I wish it was as structured as you made it sound. I should do that. But it's really like comics run on their own schedule, their own timeline. Like as you know, like it's like write the script,
Yeah.
send the pitch, write the script, write through the lettering pass, do the final proofing stage. So it's all happening kind of in its own level. And novels are much more like running a marathon. Like you have 4 to 6 months to write a draft, and that's on you to find the discipline to write a couple thousand words a day. So it'll add up to like 60 or 70,000 words or whatever your word count is. So both things are happening for me at once. Like I tend to do a lot of my comic stuff during the day because
Mhm.
that's maybe my brain is more into doing the puzzle piece of like scripting and formatting. Um, and a lot of my novel writing tends to happen at night. But then there's always like stuff that comes up. Like, I have 2 kids. There's always family responsibilities, there's events, there's things to do. So you try to just really just handle whatever's most on fire first.
That makes sense. And your story, you have some some independent work over the years. You have
Mhm.
a lot of big two stuff that is at least forefront. I have Marvel Zombies here, I have Spider-Verse, I have
So yeah.
Special Society and stuff like that. But is there a mindset that goes, this is going to be a novel and this is going to be a comic book, like, or is there just whatever's really given to you? Like obviously at this point it's not like you're out there picking and saying I want to write Marvel Zombies, black, white, and red. It's like
Right.
they're approaching you. But like something like Alter Ego or Dark Space or Secret Identity,
Mhm.
those are guessing it makes the most sense to write those as novels, and that's why they were novels, right?
Yeah, I mean, the idea for Secret Identity and Alter Ego was to tell these two stories that were set in comics, but also had comics in them, were novels with comics in them. For my creator own, so I think what you're asking is like when I get an idea that's mine, like where do I
Yeah.
put it? And I
Yeah.
think it really depends on how much I want to play with somebody else.
Mhm.
Like if it's something that I envision as a novel and I want to have like a lot of oversight and control because I have this very clear vision, or if it's something that I have an idea for, but it would be really cool to jam with so and so on it. And then I'll reach out to them and say, I have this thing. Do you want to work together? And if it works, it works. And then you kind of start the whole pitching wheel, which is its
Mhm.
own like journey. But yeah, it really depends. I mean, comics are so collaborative. Like
Yeah.
I use this metaphor all the time, but it is like playing music with someone. I've played in bands before, and it's really that kind of same synergy where you're jamming with somebody else and you hope that the end result is better than what you could have done by yourself. Whereas novels are solitary, you're isolated, and there's a point 2/3 in where you're like, I really want this to end. Like this is terrible. I want this to end. Please put me out of my misery. But then you get to the end and you go back and read it and you're like fixing it and tweaking it and you realize that you're not a total waste.
I mean, is it like how you this that I'm a introverted extrovert. Like it's a weird thing. Like I like my own space. I like my own thing to do my own thing.
Hmm.
But I also when the time arises or I'm supposed to be in a group of setting, I thrive in that setting as well. But if I really had to choose, I'd really just rather be by myself. And so like it must be that same way where like, oh, this is nice to be sitting here writing a prose novel. This is like, wow,
Yeah.
this is great. And then there's times where you're like, I just want to talk to people. I just want to be around people. And then the
Yeah, I mean,
opposite.
my background is publicity and marketing, and as a journalist, I'd have to go up to strangers and say, "What do you think about this thing that just happened?" and get their feedback. So, I do get that introverted extrovert idea. I can do parties and stuff, but then part of me wants to just go back home and like recharge and look at a wall for a couple hours. So it's kind of just knowing where you're at, I guess.
So we talked a little bit on Secret Identity and Alter Ego. Alter Ego comes out in the first week of December, December
Hmm.
3rd.
Yeah.
And so when I stumbled upon Alter Ego for not first, but the publicity for Alter Ego. Like I saw, pre-orders and all that stuff, and I was
Hmm.
like, oh shit, I got to read, Secret Identity first. And when I jumped into it, I was like, it was the perfect novel for people who love like you don't expect to get a novel like that in the comic book industry, meaning that like
Oh, good.
there's not many of that meta part of it. Like how many more novels out there are like I love the comic book industry so much, someone tell me a fictional story about the comic book
Hmm.
industry. It's like it's not very common. You might hear a fictional story about basketball or football or whatever
Right.
else is out there, but like comics, it's like either a book that's Spider-Man, your Spider-Man 2099 book, or your Daredevil book coming up, or a book
Hmm.
about or comics. There's not very many that are like the crossover. And when I read it, I was like, oh my God, I want more of this. I
Oh,
want your
good.
full career just to be writing books like this. No, it was so great. And then seeing Alter Ego being a same but different style of book. And then
Hmm.
was there always a plan to release Legendary Lynx, or is this just something that happened?
I mean, it's a little bit of both. I mean,
Okay.
Sandy Jarrell, who did the pages for Secret Identity and Alter Ego, when I was pitching the book to Flatiron, I reached out to him and I said, "Hey, this might happen, and it
Hmm.
might require like 10 to 14 pages of art. This is what it is." I sent him the novel or the part I'd written in the outline. Um, he read it and was said, I'm in." And I said, "Okay, but we need proof of concept." And so he drew a page and colored it. So when I pitched it to Flatiron, it had that sample chapters and the outline, but
Yeah.
then also this page. And I was like, this is what is going to happen. You're going to read this chapter and then immediately you're going to be in a comic book. Because I felt I really had to sell it. I had to really show like this is how it works. Anyway, they thankfully buy the book and a sequel, not a sequel then, but you get the two-book deal, and
Yeah.
Sandy and I are working on the comic pages. And as we're working on it, we keep either he says it or I say it, and it's along the lines of this should be a comic book because we were talking about like the Lynx's world, who her villains are, the supporting cast, and there's only so much you really see in those 14 pages in Secret Identity. So by the end of Secret Identity, we knew we wanted to take those 14 or so pages and expand them into a graphic novel. Um, the road to getting there was kind of circuitous because we launched it on Zestworld, which was a digital
Yeah.
platform that was kind of competing with Substack, and they ran the first 2.5 issues or so, and then they closed up shop. And so the book was done, and that's when we reached out to Mad Cave, and they were up for putting it out there as a book, and that's when we thought, wouldn't it be cool if we treat this like a very real thing? Like we say,
Yeah.
this is a reprint of the lost comic that has been out of print forever. And obviously people know it's us, like,
Yeah.
but then there's people that don't. Like there's people that James DeMatteis wrote the intro, and I love, I've already plugged him, but he's one of my favorite comic book writers, and he liked Secret Identity, which was super flattering, and I was so humbled by that. And I said, "Would you want to write the intro to this graphic novel, but do it completely like in world, like you
Mhm.
read the links while you were writing your stuff?" Um, so his intro is basically like the links influenced my work, including stuff like Craven's Last Hunt and whatever else, all the other stuff
Yeah.
he's done, not whatever, but what have you.
Yeah.
Um, and it was just such a cool like meta moment. And my favorite emails are the ones that I get from fans who are like, "I read Secret Identity, I loved it. I cannot find a copy of the links anywhere. Like I've been looking at every comic shop. Like what is it? How badly out of print is this book?" But now it is in print. So like we basically manifested this character into actual comic history, which is I love it. Like the geek in me loves stuff like that, like the world building, and so Alter Ego is the end of that sentence
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah. I love the favorite. All I can picture in my head is like Marty McFly going back in time and putting this
Yeah.
comic book somewhere so that you wrote the novels later on in life, but now he's put it back into where it was supposed to be, and we're all just
Yeah.
stumbling upon it. And now it's been part of the world, but meta. It's just I meant to do this, and I don't know why I didn't do it. Is the chapter breaks actually in the like? Are they drawn into the Legendary Lynx graphic novel? Like those chapter breaks panels?
Those pages in Secret Identity are
Are
in the
okay.
Legendary
I
Links.
meant to
Yeah.
look it up, but I'm
So,
like, it would make
mhm.
sense that they would be, but I didn't know. I was like, oh, I
Yeah.
mean, that this. So now it actually looks like those pages were just cut out of the graphic
Yeah,
novel and put
it
into
makes
the.
Secret Identity look like it excerpted from
Yes,
the Legendary Links.
that's
I will tell you, there's always room for mistakes, so it's probably not
yes,
1,000%.
yeah,
But for the most part, those are pages. All the pages in most of the pages in Secret Identity are in the trade,
mhm.
plus other stuff, and it's colored and lettered and reformatted and remastered.
And I don't know. I mean, was this the first time that someone's done something like this? I feel like it's at least one of the few times. I know that Chip Zdarsky's doing that now with the domain.
Yeah, what Chip is doing, like we've talked about it, it's very
Yeah,
much in converse. They're very much in conversation with
yeah,
each other. I mean, not directly. Like we have joked about like maybe doing like a links and domain like crossover image, which would be cool. But it's just funny that we were both in that same headspace.
yeah,
But I think that also Michael Chabon got close because you have Cavalier and Clay, the novel,
yeah.
and then he did the comics with Dark Horse. But I think this is the first time that there was comic pages in the novel that then got expanded into a comic. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But as far as I can tell, I think it is the first. And I definitely pulled a lot of inspiration from Cavalier and Clay. Like reading that book, my first takeaway was like, A, I love this book. It's one of my favorite books. But also B, when I read it in college, was I wanted to see the comics. I wanted to
Mm.
read those escapist comics. And this was before the Dark Horse books came out. Um, so that was a big motivator to have like a comic book element. And maybe down the line we can put them all together and just have one big like Secret Identity omnibus with both novels and the links. That would be pretty cool.
It's just a cool thing. And I think a lot of us who are when you become fans of something, you want the next thing. And it's not
Mhm.
like, I mean, you obviously, like we mentioned before, you're really busy and so on and so forth. And it doesn't sound like Alter Ego, like adding another chapter, another story to that book series might be trying to pull too much, trying to do too much. And so adding the Legendary Links in there and having this graphic
Mhm.
novel lets us live in that world per se again in more. And then also if anybody goes back and does a reread, it's like, okay, you can read this comic, read the comic book, then read the books
Yeah.
or whatever way you want to do it, which
Yeah.
is pretty badass. And I think that's a,
And
it's a
there's stuff in the comic book that feeds into Alter Ego. Like there's a character that messages Annie anonymously through like a Signal app, and they call themselves Apparition, and that's one of the characters you meet in the book, in the comic. That is not in the excerpts from Secret Identity. You meet who like the Lynx's mentor is, like basically what Stick is to Daredevil, this character is to the Lynx, like a mentor who has begrudgingly trained her in being a vigilante slash superhero. So yeah, it's all connected. You can read them all together and probably pull a lot more out of it, but you can also read each of those things individually. Like that was the big challenge, I think, with the links is that we had these like little clusters of pages that were created separately as interstitial moments in the novel. And then I was like, well, how am I going to weave all this together to be a 4-issue arc? And I basically had to put them all like on a, like a break, like a manifest, like when you
yeah,
do a newspaper or a
yeah.
magazine, you have the spaces for each page. And so I'm like, okay, this is page 1 and 2 of issue 1. This is page 20 of issue 3. Like, how do we get from here to here? And thankfully, Sandy is super versatile, so smart, like one of my favorite collaborators ever. And we worked Marvel style. So a lot of it was like, okay, we're going to have this fight sequence. I'd throw in some reference, but I really left it up to him
Mhm.
to figure out the pacing, not the pacing, but figure out the layout of the pages and how best to tell those beats. And it ended up being like this weird, trippy, like 70s story, like more of a like a Jim Starlin type story
Mhm.
with cosmic undertones, very Doctor Strangey and almost Steve Engleharty too. Um, then at first blush, I thought, okay, this is going to be like a street level, Doug Mensch, Frank Miller type joint where it's really just grounded and very gritty and realistic. And there are elements of that, but there's a supernatural kind of twisty part to it that we neither of us were really expecting, but I think makes it more fun.
Mhm. Yeah. It's a lot of fun and it's also beautiful looking. So like Sandy's artwork, but also the color by Allison Gray is just
Yeah.
phenomenal as well. So there's that. The pages being like the yellow to make it look like it was this older book.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
live in it. It's this cool thing. And I love how you mentioned the separate thing. It's like Secret Identity by itself is a standalone. If you never did anything else in that world ever again, I don't think that
Mhm.
anybody would really be upset about it, because I think it concluded well. It was a well written story, and
Thank you.
then you could read the Legendary Lynx by itself because it's just a comic book. Like
Yeah.
it's nice to have it connected, but it's a story that if you've never even heard of your books, you could read. And I
Hmm.
would think that Alter Ego, in a sense, could be read by itself too. I mean, if you didn't read Secret Identity, it's not like you'd be completely lost, but it helps with it. But it doesn't, like, the story
Yeah.
itself is like it's a future story, and that you do touch on the stuff that you kind of need to know from Secret Identity, which is awesome. But like I said, for fans like myself, and I'm sure there's many more like me who just loved living in that world for a little bit, adding
Hmm.
Legendary Links and seeing that was so cool, and actually seeing the cover and seeing the characters and seeing all that stuff in the play on solicitation, where at the bottom of
Oh
the
yeah.
solicitation it's like, no, but really, it's just by Alex.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like it was just like just want to make sure people
And that
know this
was,
is not
yeah.
actually.
And that was Matt Cave very smartly was like, look, at some point we have to
Yes.
say, like, you wrote it because we have to try and sell this thing. Like, otherwise it just seems like this very random reprint. Um, but I think that was the big challenge for Alter Ego because I think stories should end when they
Mhm.
reach their end, and it's okay for things to end and for sentences to have a period. Like, in the media landscape now, I feel like everything is about IP in many ways and about continuing the IP and keeping the brands alive. And at the end of Secret Identity, I was like, well, this is it. Like, this is, maybe we'll do the comic and that'll be that. But when I wrote that epilogue without spoiling anything, where you kind of
Yeah.
see Carmen in the present day and you meet that reporter that is interviewing her, that's when I got the ideas going about doing this modern day story.
Mhm.
But I also wanted it to feel essential, not
Mhm.
feel like, oh, this is, Carmen through the years investigating comic book crimes. Like, that could be fun, but it was not the kind of story I wanted to write. And so Alter Ego, you have a new protagonist, you have a new mystery, and you have the backdrop of Secret Identity that, if you want to, like you said, if you want to go and read it, and you'll get a much fuller picture. But Alter Ego hopefully exists on its own and feels different. The pacing is different. It's much more of a thriller than a, like, kind of moody noir. So yeah, that was a challenge.
What we're hoping for in the future, Alex, is that people debate on what's the best order to read them in. Like, is it a
Oh
prequel?
yeah.
Like, it's like Star Wars, right? They still have the Star Wars lore on. Like, is
Yeah.
it, do you watch them in order? Do you read the Legendary Links first? Do you read, so on and so forth? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't
No.
know how you would do it. I would guess my reading order is by publication. Like, you read
Yeah.
Secret Identity, then the links, then you read Alter Ego, but you could make a case for reading the links first.
Hmm. And then you could read, Alter Ego
Or
and
you
be like,
could
oh,
read
that's
Alter Ego
prequel.
first. Yeah, you could read
Prequel.
Alter Ego first and then say, oh, well, let me go back and kind of flesh out this mystery.
So what we're trying to say to everybody out there too is to just buy them all, and then you do whatever you
Yeah.
want with them.
Yeah, and read them however you want and then buy
Right?
some for your friends.
Yes, exactly. It's the best option there. And
Yeah.
Mad Cave is such a fun company to work with too. They put out some really cool stuff, and for them to
Mhm.
actually take this and have it be on a place like Mad Cave and not have to be like an image book where you, like, you're doing it all yourself kind of thing. Having Mad Cave's help,
Right.
is pretty cool in that sense too. And they have a great marketing team and all that stuff. So I think that people are. What's really cool for me and for someone like yourself is that those people who don't know that Secret Identity or Alter Ego exist, that are living the comic book world and don't read very many novels, might actually
Mhm.
now go, oh, now I know about this book, and it also might. Like, I know my LCS owner Paul Eaton at Galactic Comics has discussed about carrying Secret Identity and Alter
Oh,
Ego in
cool.
the shop,
Yeah, that would be awesome.
because of that. And I think that's like I said, that's that the books aren't like a Star Wars book, but they're still
Mhm.
comic book related. And I think those people who are really into the world of comics would enjoy this. And
Yeah, I
there's a
mean, that's the
mystery
cool
to it.
thing when you see the mediums kind of
Yeah.
crossing. But yeah, Mad Cave's great. I think also they were originally a Miami-based company, which
Yeah.
is a nice connection to Carmen and Annie and me. I mean, being from Miami as
Mhm.
well. They've been really supportive with Dick Tracy, with the links, and
Mhm.
just kind of putting it out there. They do have a really great editorial and marketing side.
It's great. And yeah, you do have Dick Tracy there. It was kind of funny because
Hmm.
we originally had talked about coming on with you and Michael a while
Yeah.
back, that the schedules got full and we weren't able to do it. So see that the Dick
Hmm.
Tracy of it all. But then it's so funny. I'm like, you move along and you're so busy with so many different things. It's like the longer the different dates about trying to get this recorded, it's like,
I
okay, now
know.
you've got
Yeah.
this to talk about. So
Right.
I also read Dark Space, which was phenomenal.
Oh,
With
thank
you
you,
with yeah, was it you and Rob Hart,
Rob
which is
Hart. Yeah.
great. It's a great novel, sci-fi novel. If anybody wants to read that, you got Dick Tracy. That's
Hmm.
now the trade's coming out here pretty soon, or
Yeah.
yeah,
Next month.
soon.
Hmm.
Yeah, and then you got your Spider-Man books over at Marvel with Spider-Verse
Spider
stuff
Society just
and
ended.
Spider
Yeah. Hmm.
Society. Yeah. You did Marvel Zombies, all that stuff. But you also got, and I was in discussion with Dynamite about reading it ahead of time, but we lost
Mhm.
conversation here. You got Green Hornet and Miss Fury coming out too, right?
Yeah, that's coming out early next year. I think they switched up the release date, which is good. I
Okay.
think it gets a little more breathing room early next year. But that's me, Henry Barajas co-writing, and Federico Ceresa, who is a new artist. I've never seen him anywhere else, but he's just got this very great, like hyper detailed style, and that's been fun just because it's two pulp heroes. It's Green Hornet and Miss Fury, and I don't think they've interacted before, but it was nice to create an element that combines their origins a bit. So you kind of get a little bit of this lost history between the characters. So that's been interesting, and I can't wait for people to see the interiors because I think it's going to blow some people away.
It's really cool, and I think Dynamite is one of those ones that's they've been around for a while and they've got a lot of different things, and
Hmm.
now they just all these like pop culture icon characters are coming out from them.
Hmm.
I know Ed doing
Yeah.
Silverhawks, and there's all kinds of stuff that are coming out from Dynamite right now. But Green Hornet and Miss Fury is a pretty cool thing.
Hmm.
But again, you got Dick Tracy, you got Spider-Man, you got Star Wars. You're doing a Star Wars
Yeah.
run over there at Marvel as well. Are you doing a Galactus thing in early next year too? Is that
I'm doing one of those What If
yeah,
Galactus deputized character
yeah,
X as
yeah?
their herald, and I'm doing the Moon Knight one, which has been really neat. It's Scott Eaton's drawing, and I've loved Scott's stuff for a long
It-
time, ever since I was just a fan. And so it's a little bit of a love letter to the Mensch Sienkiewicz Moon Knight
yeah.
stuff, and also a nod to like the crazy 90s cosmic Marvel things that I liked as a kid, like, all the Heralds of Galactus, and the issue opens with a big Khonshu Galactus battle. So it's a big throwdown, but there's some character development there. And it was just really fun to write Moon Knight, who's one of my favorite Marvel characters.
Mhm. That's awesome. But the big thing to me, as we finish up here, we would talk for about half an hour now, and I'd like
Yeah.
to wrap things up. Is you are doing the Daredevil book, and so I loved Lisa Jewell's
Hmm.
Jessica Jones book was phenomenal. It was the
Yeah, it was good.
perfect those people who are into that like that kind of novel, but like it was like and it could be any character, but Jessica Jones like was the character, if that makes any sense. Like it could
Yeah.
be any mystery novel, but then it lives in the
Hmm.
world of Marvel Comics. And I love that aspect of it. So like this Daredevil book coming out, I mean, to be on the next book in this crime series that they're doing over there.
Yeah.
Are you done with it? Are you still writing it? Like how does that, is it
I'm finishing it up.
okay.
I'm hopefully going to turn it in about a month or so.
Okay.
It's cool. I mean, I love Daredevil. Daredevil's one of my favorite Marvel characters. I know I just said that about Moon Knight, but Daredevil was one of my I was a Spider-Man guy, but I would always check in on Daredevil and keep tabs on him, like, the Ann Nocenti run, the
Yeah.
DG Chichester run. And then he's just been so blessed in terms of creators like Bendis, Brubaker, Diggle, Zdarsky, Soule, Wade, like just run after run after run, and beautifully illustrated, like Alex Maleev, Michael Lark, Paulo Rivera, Chris Samney. I'm going to forget somebody, but Ron Gardner, Phil Noto, Marco Cicchetto, and now you have Saladin and Aaron. So it's really been just unstoppable in terms of like creativity. And so I'm trying to find like what's my voice in this space. What story is there to tell? And so I tried to just boil it down to the kind of stories I like to read, which are very grounded, street
Mhm.
level, noir, but also about Matt Murdock and how
Yeah.
messy he is, and how, his constant struggle is between his vision of justice, like the legal kind, but also street justice. And how do
Yeah.
you consolidate the two? Like, how do you come to terms with being a defense attorney who protects the innocent and sometimes the guilty to someone who is judge, jury, and
Mhm.
executioner in their own way? Like, he basically determines, I'm going to, punch this guy and then drag him to prison, and that'll be that. And how do you balance those things out? And his personal life is always a mess. He's always like struggling to find romance and friendship and all these things that we all. I feel like it's very relatable.
Mhm.
And so it's called Enemy of My Enemy. And basically, it starts out with the death of one of his biggest villains, and you find out that the prime suspect is Frank Castle. And so Matt has to figure out, do I defend Frank Castle? Like, or do I just like let him go to prison because he killed this guy that I hate anyway?
Mhm.
Like let it resolve itself. And so that's a big struggle for him. But then also as he starts to get into it deeper and deeper into the mystery, he realizes there's more to this than just the Punisher killing a villain.
Yeah. That's awesome. I'm so looking forward to it because like I said, I love the Jessica Jones one because it was, like I said, the more grounded part of it. The idea
Hmm.
that the Marvel universe is this massive bombastic thing, but it also is like there's street level things that are happening as well. And
Yeah.
and the you get to relate with the characters. You get to get them on an emotional and more grounded level, which
Yeah.
is really cool. So I'm excited for it. I knew there was like a footnote when Lisa Jewell's book was coming out that you were writing one, and so
Yeah.
now that you actually have a cover out and there's actually bigger announcements and stuff like that out for it, I'm so
Yeah, the
excited to
first
actually see
chapter
it.
is going to be in the paperback. So if people get the paperback edition of the Lisa Jewell book, they'll read the first chapter of the Daredevil book,
That's
or an
phenomenal.
early
So
chapter. Things may move
yes,
around. Yeah.
yes, exactly. An early peek at the book
Yeah.
itself. Yeah. So Secret Identity is available now at your bookstores. Check that out. It's also available on audiobook. Alter
Hmm.
Ego hits December 3rd. The
Right.
Legendary Lynx graphic novel hit last week as of recording
Hmm.
this. So that's out now. You can get that,
Yeah.
LCSs and stuff like that. All your different titles. If you're a big fan of Alex's, just talk to your LCS and they'll be able to tell you which books that Alex, all the
Yeah. And if
many
you
variety of them are on.
yeah, you can go to my website, alexsegura.com. I also have a Substack, alexsegura.substack.com, where I update everybody, and I'm on Instagram as well.
So, and yeah, so check all those out. But yeah, my big thing is grab Secret Identity and grab Alter Ego on
Thank
December
you.
3rd because I think they're phenomenal and I think it's really cool. And you can pre-order
Appreciate it.
soon. Either you can pre-order right now, I think, on most websites for Enemy of My Enemy as well. I believe you
Yeah,
can
yeah,
get
yeah.
that
It's
now.
up for
So
pre-order. Hmm.
yeah, so check that out. But thank you so much, Alex, for taking some time out to chat your books and so much more. And good luck in the future.
Oh, you too, my friend. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.